That's me in South Africa in March of 2000. I was on a year-long bike trip around the world. We went to more than 40 countries on 5 continents, and everywhere we went, we found people who just welcomed us as Americans and they were so welcoming. And we were really lucky that we went on that trip in the year 2000 because 9 months after we returned, our world and America's role in it changed dramatically. That's me next to perhaps the most ironically named place on the planet, Camp Justice, Guantanamo. Since 2002, 750 men have been detained at Guantanamo. 40 of them remain. And of those, 5 are facing charges that they participated in and orchestrated the attacks of September 11th, 2001. And I am on a team that represents one of them. I've been asked many times, including by my family, most of whom are here, why do you do that? Why would you, as an American, represent somebody who is charged with one of the most serious attacks against our country? And I'll tell you that there's a personal part and a systematic part, which is that I believe that the American justice system works best when everyone is represented, including those charged with the most horrendous crimes. But also I believe that individual human beings are charged with crimes, and it's our job to recognize that humanity, because if I don't, it will reduce mine. Now, I'm here today to talk about what I can tell you about Guantanamo, but also what I can tell you. And what that means is I speak only for myself. I do not speak on behalf of the government. I do not speak on behalf of my client, just me. And what I can tell you about Guantanamo all comes from unclassified, open source information. Nothing I will say today is classified, and nothing I say should be deemed to confirm or deny anything that is classified. And for that reason, you're going to see that I'm going to read parts of my speech because it's really important that I not stray into any discussion of potentially classified information so I can protect national security and so I don't get hauled off the stage in handcuffs. For most Americans, the story of September 11th starts on a sunny Tuesday morning when they first heard of the planes flying into the Twin Towers, into the Pentagon, and into a field in Pennsylvania. And I know some of you are young enough that you don't have actual memories of those days, but for those of you who do, close your eyes for just a moment and imagine where you were when you heard about the attacks. It's seared into our memory. And I want to acknowledge that these attacks devastated the lives of the families of the 2,976 people who died that day. And we should never, ever forget their losses. And nothing I say today is intended in any way to diminish their losses. Today I'm going to invite you to consider that the story of September 11th didn't start on a sunny Tuesday morning, nor did it start with even the planning of these attacks. But rather, 9/11 started decades, if not generations before. It's not the start of the story, it's the middle. Palestinian poet Mahmoud Barghouti writes, "It's easy to blur the truth with a simple linguistic trick. Start your story from secondly." And so I invite you to learn the story before the attacks so that you can avoid an understanding of 9/11 in a way that starts with secondly. Or as Chimamanda Adichie explained it, to avoid the danger of a single story, because I fear that many Americans have a single story about the attacks of September 11th, that it began on a sunny Tuesday morning. Now, figuring out when this story begins is complicated, and understanding why it happened requires going further and deeper into our nation's history than most people have or have been willing to do. A few days after the attacks, then President George W. Bush said, "They hate us for our freedoms." So this micro-narrative is a catchy slogan, but it utterly fails to capture the complex history of Western involvement in Muslim countries, a complex history filled with dispossession, generations of Western colonialism, and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent children. Now, I have to admit, it's a little bit scary and hard to stand on this stage and talk about the why of 9/11 because I fear that I will be accused of being a conspiracy theorist or an apologist for al-Qaeda, and I am neither. I am perhaps more informed than most because of the work I do, but I invite you to learn more about why those who planned the attacks might have thought that violence was a necessary response to their experiences. Now, whether you agree or vehemently disagree, it's important to understand the history and our involvement in it. So I invite you to explore through books and movies. There's dozens out there that you can watch or read. I'm going to mention 3. Crusade and Jihad by William Polk is probably the best narrative of the history of this time. Noam Chomsky has written a short but important book called 9/11, Was There an Alternative? And the History Channel did a mini-series called The Road to 9/11, and while I believe that it starts a little bit with Secondly, it is a good introduction to how the government perceives the road to a 9/11. So if the first chapter of our story is the road to 9/11, you might wonder, what choices did our government make so that the road from 9/11 ended up in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, in the military commissions? And that's the next chapter of the story, and as far as I know, there's no mini-series on that one yet. Now, some of what I'm going to describe is graphically violent, and I apologize in advance for that, but I believe that we need to talk about this and be clear in describing it so that we can describe that what we did to these men went beyond any rule of law or accepted American norm. So after 9/11, the actions of the CIA, the FBI, and other government officials were completely classified, and we couldn't talk about them. Until about 4 years ago, when the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence issued an unclassified version of part of their report on what they called the Rendition, Detention, and Interrogation Program, what many people call the torture program. And I appreciate their work, especially Oregon's Senator Ron Wyden, because it's what allows me to speak about this here today and tell you this part of the story. So I want to ask you to do me a favor. Please put your arms up in the air with your fingers together, like this. And many of you may believe that you know about the CIA program, given the press coverage over the past 18 years, but did you know that 39 men suffered torture at the hands of the CIA? Did you know that the vast majority of those 39 were never charged and have never been charged with any crime? You may have heard something about the first person tortured by the CIA, a man named Zain al-Abidin Mohammed Hussein, better known as Abu Zubaydah, or father of Zubaydah. Now, Abu Zubaydah was interrogated after he'd been severely damaged and wounded during his capture. He was in the hospital for about 2 months, and after he was released, the torture began. His head was repeatedly slammed against a wall. He was forced to stand, sit, or crouch inside coffin-like boxes. He was hung from his wrists with his feet just barely touching the floor in cold and dark rooms where he was left to defecate on himself with no ability to clean up. Abu Zubaydah was tortured through acts specifically designed to be abhorrent to his religion as a Muslim man. And I imagine some might be thinking, well, he was a terrorist. He got what he deserved. But Abu Zubaydah has never been charged with any crime. In fact, the government has admitted that they made a mistake. He's not who they thought he was. He was forced to say things during his torture, and none of them have proved to be actionable intelligence. But he remains at Guantanamo 17 years after his capture. You can put your arms down now. And you may recognize that technique as something that the Vietnamese used against Senator John McCain, and he had lifelong effects from that torture. You only held your arms up there for about 2 minutes, maybe even less. But our government used this technique to deprive people from sleep, sometimes for as long as 180 hours. That's more than a week. And some of you may be thinking, I've pulled an all-nighter. It's not that big of a deal. I know how to go without sleep. But think about it, how tired you were after one night of no sleep. 7 nights, no sleep, arms hanging, feet barely touching the floor. Now, some of you may have seen a movie that came out a few years ago called Zero Dark 30. And in the opening scene, you see a man named Ammar, who is modeled actually after one of the defendants in the 9/11 case, Ammar al-Baluchi. The film shows him being brutally tortured. His head is slammed repeatedly against a wall. He's slapped across the face while he's tied to a chair. He's naked, beaten, humiliated. What is shown in the film is so horrific, I had to close my eyes and cover my ears rather than watch it. And the torture in the film only lasts about 5 or 10 minutes, but for Ammar al-Baluchi, it lasted for more than 3 years. There are other things that happened that got a lot less media attention. Did you know that the CIA regularly threatened the families and children of people? The 7- and 9-year-old sons of a suspect were detained, covered with insects to torture them in an effort to get them to tell the interrogators where their father was. They didn't know. Later, their photograph was hung in his cell, and with the threat that if he didn't cooperate, they would be killed. His sons would be killed. Now, one torture technique in particular has been described often in the media using a euphemism that totally masks its true horror: waterboarding. Imagine this. You're tied down to a table. A cloth is placed over your face so you can't breathe freely. A steady stream of water, gallons of water, is poured over your face. You gasp, you struggle, you scream, you cry, you beg for them to stop, but they keep pouring the water, sometimes for up to 40 seconds. It feels like drowning. It is like drowning. And the worst part, that we participated in this kind of action, the worst part is that it didn't work. Instead, it led to many false and misleading information. It didn't lead to actionable intelligence, which was what they said they were doing it for. Now, I know this is really disturbing information, but it's important to understand for 2 reasons, or maybe at least 2 reasons. First, the torture was done by our government in our names with our tax dollars. Second, it's the reason that 18 years after the attacks, no trial has been held for those alleged responsible for them. This brings us to the next chapter of the story: what the government has been doing to cause the delays so that 18 years later, there still has not even been a trial date set for those accused of the attacks of September 11th. So after the attacks, President Bush decided that anybody captured in the War on Terror would be taken to the military base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, because he believed that they were taken there, the U.S. Constitution and the Geneva Conventions wouldn't apply. Now, he was wrong, but that's what he believed. He also decided that they should be tried in military commissions, which have been used throughout our history for trials of war criminals. But most military commissions are held on the battlefield shortly after the alleged offense arising to them. This one is being held on a remote island, thousands and thousands of miles away from the battlefield, and hasn't even started more than 18 years later. Now, just a few weeks ago, the General Accounting Office, the government watchdog agency, issued a report to Congress and called these proceedings the most important criminal trials in United States history, at a cost of up to and almost $1 billion. Yes, billion with a B. And so you have to ask, why is it taking so long if they're putting that much money into it? And why is it costing that much money? So the government has done a lot of things that have prevented this case from going to trial in the last 18 years. First was the 3 to 4 years of delay while men were tortured in overseas locations instead of being brought to the United States and taken to trial. And then it took another 5 years after they were brought to Guantanamo before they were indicted and arraigned on the current charges. And since that time, the government has hidden evidence, interfered with the defense counsel, and so much more. The Senate report that I talked about, the unclassified version of it, there is a classified version that is 6,000 pages long based on 6 million documents. We've only seen the executive summary. We, as the defense attorneys with security clearances, only can see the same thing that you can see. Even the military judge, as far as we know, has never seen the full report about what our government did. And not only have we been denied access to the report, but we have been told that if we try to go investigate the torture that was given to our clients, that if we try to talk to somebody who might have information about it, who witnessed it, who participated in it, we can be prosecuted. We've been not allowed to do it. Can you imagine in a regular criminal case, somebody tells their lawyer that they were physically abused by the police, and the lawyer asked to go talk to the police officers or the witnesses or see the location where that physical abuse happened, and they were told, no, you can't do that? It wouldn't happen. But in this case, it has. And this matters because this is a capital case. And in capital cases, the defense is obligated to present every piece of evidence that would help the jury decide whether to apply the death penalty. And the government has completely interfered with our ability to do that. And they've done it in so many ways that I can only describe a few. So one day, during a visit with his lawyers, one of the detainees pointed up to what looked like a smoke detector and said, I think that's a bug, like a listening device. And his lawyers kind of laughed and thought he's been watching a few too many spy movies or something. But they got up on a chair and looked at it and wrote down the name of the manufacturer, and they went and did some research, and they were amazed to find that it was indeed a listening device in the attorney-client visiting room, which is supposed to be private, which is supposed to have privileged communication. Now, in most trials, if the government had conducted misconduct like that, the charges would be dismissed. But the smoke detector bug was found in 2013, and there have been no consequences against the government. In fact, in 2017, another listening device was found in another attorney-client visiting room. And again, no consequences for whoever placed it there. On more than 10 occasions over the last few years, the government has alleged misconduct by defense attorneys, and every single one of those allegations has been found to be baseless. The allegations are really just a shot across the bow to try to stop us from zealously representing our clients. It hasn't stopped us, but it's been an attempt to do that. And on 3 different occasions, at least 3 occasions, the government sent agents to attempt to recruit a defense attorney member or a defense team member to work as an informant for the FBI, to tell the FBI about what was happening inside the defense team. And on one occasion, it actually worked. And a defense team member started reporting to the FBI what the defense lawyers were talking about. And when it was finally found out, it led to an 18-month delay in the proceedings. It's another part of why this case hasn't gone to trial yet. And the government likes to blame the defense for all the delay in any criminal case, and this one in particular. But this case, the delay has been caused by the government actions, by the torture, by the hiding of relevant evidence and not letting us investigate, and their interference with the defense teams. It's led to the vast majority of the delay. Now, I've described only a few of the injustices that are happening on a daily basis in Guantanamo, in the military commissions, and I urge you to learn more. One way is to follow the Twitter feed of Carol Rosenberg. She's now a reporter with the New York Times, and she's the only reporter that covers Guantanamo full-time in the entire country, and she's been there from the beginning. And I wish I had a more compelling call to action that I could share with you, but for now, in the spirit of TED's Ideas We're Spreading, keep informed, share the story, don't allow it to be started with secondly. That's what we can do. And as Dr. King teaches, we have an obligation to protest against the injustices at Guantanamo. We have an obligation to refuse to start the story with secondly. And we have an obligation for those lives lost and damaged, for those tortured and indefinitely detained. We have an obligation to seek justice. Thank you.